This presentation has been prepared by Team 4, consisting of Laith Alabadalit, Jason Borden, Donna Papworth, and Francis Sanders. The focus of this presentation is to address Assignment 3, Working with Power, and as a group we have focused specifically on the subtopic of power and control. To address the topic of power and control, we analysed a section of the film The Circle, a 2016 American techno-thriller film based on a Dave Eggers novel. The particular scene chosen and the film overall goes on to portray many themes of power and the consequences of such, and in critically analysing the film it has been said that this may show us a possible path that the world may or is taking in the digital techno era that we are currently in. We will now go on to elaborate on the themes that have been drawn upon, the consequences and impacts of these themes, and how this would apply in a workplace context.
Major power themes were analysed and clustered. Themes demonstrate the utilisation of power both by the actors and objects portrayed in the film. Themes focused on the use of surveillance, worker empowerment, social and cultural power structures. The use of sophisticated technology instilled emotions, values and worldviews. These both empower but control employees, which are the essential themes of the Circle 2016. Surveillance, which can also be defined as a continuous observation of a person or a group to gather information. The Circle 2016 presented both sides of power of surveillance. The positive one, where workers, or circulars as called in the movie, have a real-time access to information. Elite employees who have high personal status and power, either intellectually, economically, or technologically. According to Fisher 2008, knowledge is power and it replaces all other effort. Employees and managers share an empowerment discourse represented in self-management and purposeful effort to better performance. Now, the negative side of surveillance is when workers are constantly inspected, judged, and scrutinized. Ball and Wilson 2008 described computerized monitoring as the whip of the technological age. Employees' activity are highly visible and scrutinized, increasing control. Now, empowerment, which is the second theme of major power analyzed in the film. The circle exemplifies the encouraging of employees to be result-oriented, ambitious for success, and self-motivated, with a culture of high achievement and highly congruent people and communities of work, as found in Hollander and Offerman in 1990. The film focused on work design and work motivation tools that are designed to drive high individual contribution and achievement, as found in Boniface 2014. It is vital in the modern environments which aim to high cost savings, improve productivity, and increase organizational performance, as found in Bowen and Lola 1992. The creation of conducive workplace in which employees believe they have their own major power and judgment to influence their performance and the higher outcomes of the organization. Now, May, who is the newest and least experienced in the Circle organization, is provided with information and high amounts of involvement since day one to emotionally invest in the greater outcomes of the company, and then she gets rewarded through ratings for her performance, as found in Bowen and Lola 1992.
Employee success at the Circle is inexorably linked with participation in the social community. In this way, it's a form of social and cultural control. Extra role participation in contributing to the civil and social goals of the Circle is verbally implied, and it's implied also that it's discretionary. However, it doesn't seem so. Research does link greater voluntary participation to employee satisfaction, positive workplace climate, and organisation outcomes. This was found by Rotunda and Sackett in 2002. Good organisational citizenship or extra role behaviour however, is defined as voluntary or self-initiated. Vigoto and Gatto say organisations use power and peer pressure to engage people in activities they would not normally engage in. In this way, it is abusive and exploitative. Most commonly, like the circle, it's embedded in the identity and culture of the workplaces, and this was found by Kuhn in 2006. So how is power used at the circle? Computer monitoring and video surveillance data is provided to the employee in real time and also via their mentor and their manager's feedback in a constant way. Attainment is measured against 100% performance ratings, and they're getting constant verbal feedback on how they're going against this 100% with ideas of how to attain it. Empowered employees are part of an elite culture at the circle. The flip side of this is that high performance is expected and total commitment to the circle is required by all employees. Employees are monitored for attendance at weekend and social events, their levels of sharing of personal information and socialising with others. There's the use of peer ratings and surveillance, which is used to enforce those expectations, and employees are queried for not attending weekend social events, their levels of sharing of everything that they like and what they do with others. The circle's use of enforcing expectations through peer ratings and surveillance could be seen as an exploitative culture of power.
Hello and welcome to the next segment of our presentation, which will cover the consequences, impacts and effects of power and control in the workplace. An overview, a great way to look at this is through a call centre environment where workplace monitoring is nothing new. A lot of research has been conducted over a long time exploring the effects, consequences and impacts of having such monitoring in place. This research is in line with our video, The Circle, and we're going to break these down into three key areas where we've concluded that there are significant impacts. First is the intrusion into one's personal life. The second is stress on employees, and the third being abuse of power by using information. Okay, so with the intrusion into one's personal life, the call centre environment is a really obvious place to continue to look for the standard and well-known call centre email monitoring and telephone call monitoring. Employees are likely to see this as a form of control. Aris identified this in 2001 and went on to say it's an intrusion into their privacy and creates distrust between the employee and employer relationship. This is an example of computer-based performance monitoring, which is defined in Ball and Wilson 2000, where it's described as the whip of the modern workplace, that computers and technology is used to monitor the performance of employees. This is also part of a wider concept called panopticism. Bentham identified this, and Ball and Wilson cite Bentham in their work, in which it is proposed that power is everywhere, being duplicated locally, in this case, for our example, with the video by the local managers, and they're using knowledge bases and forms of disclosure to obtain their knowledge, and hence the rise of panopticism was identified. So stress on employees in such a heavily monitored workspace, it causes significant stress, resulting in depression, low job satisfaction and high anxiety. Interestingly, the design and method used for the monitoring do impact on the levels of the stress, particularly where employees can't meet the performance targets. Either they've got a lack of training and don't know what to do, or they've got excessively high workloads, becomes a factor in their stress levels. This begs the question about care levels of organisations, about how much they care of their employees. Are they aware of the stress that they're putting them under? An example of a failure of a duty of care by an organisation or an industry or industries are exampled in the Me Too campaign. The abuse of power by using information creates an ethical debate associated with organisations undertaking performance monitoring. Are they collecting too much information? And are their employees feeling this is inappropriate or unwarranted? Consent to monitoring is rarely provided. Employees have little to no opportunity to opt out of such monitoring. And despite information and privacy policies being in place, employees still uphold strong views about what organisations can and should be entitled to collect. This is identified in Ball and Margulis in 2011.
So what does this mean in a workplace context? Self-management and intense surveillance together can have a perverse effect, diminishing personal power and causing resistance. Organisations need to find a balance between empowerment and surveillance. Intense surveillance and monitoring defeats any real empowerment or ability to grow self-monitoring behaviours. Ball and Wilson and Jensen and Rover both discuss how this can have perverse effects through reducing employee power, causing resistance and demotivating employees. It is helpful, therefore, for managers to consider the balance and intent of surveillance as well as its usage, and they must also do the same for empowerment strategies. Clear controls such as policy and best practice frameworks are essential to ensure surveillance is appropriate and not abused, and this should be transparent to all. So if the employer decides to go with an empowerment model, what do they need to do? Empowerment models involve the explicit creation of environments where power is shared. This may include the maintenance of a conducive workplace, somewhere where people want to be, they want to highly perform, and they want to provide feedback. They'd be thinking about documenting and auditing how employees are provided with their own power and judgment. How do you know that a workplace is empowered unless you can measure those feelings of empowerment? One way to consider this is the development of formal feedback loops that enable transparency on how employees can influence their performance and the higher outcomes of the organisation. Identify and share how employees influence decisions. This is important for developing trust. Reconsideration of the usage of surveillance as a primary tool for feedback is highly recommended in an empowerment model.
In dealing with the implication of workplace stress, we would recommend having greater clarity and employee agreement to the boundaries of monitoring and information sharing. We feel it is imperative that employees understand what is in place and ensure that this is for the purpose of management activities alone and that employee privacy and potential for degradation are considered. We suggest that organisations consider articulating recommendations to support the use of and overall intent of surveillance versus empowerment. The focus should be on how performance monitoring can support and positively influence employees through in-the-moment feedback. With empowerment, we would suggest that organisations analyse and explicitly invest in the creation of an environment where power is shared, and that intentions around employee expectations are made clear at the onset. This will alleviate any issues in relation to implied and defined activities and ensure that work parameters are clearly in place to enable employees to opt in as appropriate. To this end, we feel it would be necessary to introduce formal orientation and induction sessions, with sufficient opportunity prescribed for the delivery of formal and informal feedback, creating a transparent environment that supports business goals and objectives. Throughout the presentation, we have focused on the theme of power and control and how this can often have negative impacts on an organisation and workforce overall. Surveillance and monitoring comes at a price of employee satisfaction. Monitoring performance and the culture that this creates can often blur the lines between work and personal boundaries. Whilst monitoring has been popular throughout the call centre environment for many decades, we continue to see monitoring advances, particularly in this technology era that we are in. Not only does this introduce the consequences we spoke of earlier, there are also important ethical and legal standards that come into play. We therefore conclude that having clearly defined policies and procedures in place to support the mechanisms and reasoning for such monitoring are critical to both employer and employee. The following journal articles have been referenced throughout our research and composition of our report and presentation. Thank you.